Wake Up the Gypsy and Me is a Warner Brothers cartoon from 1933. It's directed by Rudolf Ising and stars the voices of Rudolf Ising and the King's Men. And Ising voices a character called Rice Pudding, who is, of course, a caricature of Rasputin. And I was worried that this was going to be very, very racist because it sounded from the description that it absolutely was going to be. It's not as bad as I'd expected. That's not to say it's amazing, but it's definitely not as bad as some other Warner Brothers cartoons. But absolutely, in places, it's a little bit awkward. We have some really great music, we have some interesting character designs, and everybody's dancing and having a good time to begin with. And then the character of Rice Pudding is using binoculars to stare at this dancing gypsy girl, as she's referred to, and he's a very well animated character, and I have to say we spend a lot of time with him. Unusually for this kind of villain in a Warner Brothers cartoon, we get to see his personality developing and becoming more angry and becoming more sinister until it gets to the point where, he tries to go after what he wants and things get a little bit disturbing. But visually, that character is just incredible. And I don't know exactly if a person would instantly recognize it as Rasputin if they just saw a still from it. I'm not the most knowledgeable about Rasputin. I have, very basic knowledge, but I don't know if, I doubt I would have recognized the character if I'd just seen a still completely out of context. But when I know it's him, I think the visual representation is pretty decent, but certainly exaggerated, absolutely exaggerated. This villain character is terrifying. The way he moves is so creepy, and his facial expressions are horrendously dark and disturbing, but it works so well. And I don't want to say too much about what happens as the cartoon progresses, as I do recommend it. I recommend it for two reasons. The first is that the actual animation quality is really good, and just the design of this character and how he just builds up his eeriness as the cartoon progresses is so well done. And that's me, of course, viewing it not as a character of Rasputin, but just as a villainous character of Rice Pudding, which I think is a brilliant name. But I would love to know what you think of the character, if you do know a lot about Rasputin, or if you had certain expectations for what you wanted from this character. Did it live up to those expectations? Is it maybe a little bit too different to what you wanted to see? I had no expectations, so I can't comment in that regard. And the other reason I recommend it, of course, is because this was released in the 30s, and it's an interesting look at how Warner Brothers have responded to various historical happenings that predate this by not too many years. Maybe a couple of decades, but certainly much closer in time than where we are now. And it's interesting to see attitudes. Of course, Warner Brothers isn't representative of everybody's attitudes towards Russian people and indeed towards Rasputin, but it is interesting to see from a historical aspect, to see how they've responded and interpreted events and the character of Rasputin. So that's definitely very fascinating, and the animation is brilliant. The music is really good as well. Yes, there are some stereotypes. Yes, the character of Rasputin might be a little bit awkward and I would say exaggerated. I mean, it depends on what you feel about Rasputin. There are some people who believe he was terrible, terrible, and there are some people who think that he wasn't maybe as bad. Maybe comparing him to other people, he wasn't as bad as some people. Maybe not as villainous as this cartoon makes him out to be, is what I'm trying to say, because this villain is horrendous, but people have different beliefs. And I would love to know if this version matches up with what you think, or if it's a little bit too out there. I'd love to know what people think of the cartoon in general. Personally, I found it to be not as bad as expected. The actual animation quality is very good, and the pacing is great. I'm disturbed by how dark they made this villain, though. He is very, very sinister, and within the context of the cartoon, it works very well. So it is worth watching. I don't think it will be for everybody, but if you do check it out, I'd love to know what you think of it.